Okay, hopefully we're all live and everybody out there has joined us now. Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank by saying hello, welcome. I'm quite nervous. Hopefully everyone else is going to enjoy today, but I'd like to say welcome to everyone joining us for the first of the new BizSpace webinar series. This one is the future of business. Now, anyone who knows me knows working with technology is always a bit of fun for me, so this could definitely be interesting today. I'm Emma Long, the MD at BizSpace North, and I'm really excited to be hosting the first one in this series. This Future of BizSpace webinar series is designed to provide advice and guidance, hopefully, to all sizes of businesses across the UK. As we emerge into a post-COVID working world, it's all a bit strange and we're all feeling a little bit unsure. The first topic we'll be covering in today's session has been identified by following a survey of our own customers. We've been getting so many questions as people have been coming back to work that we thought that it'd be really useful to highlight it within a webinar. We're going to develop this program over the course of the coming months with any further sessions to help businesses navigate through these new challenges and definitely uncertainties that arise as we adjust to this new normal. Okay, so this first webinar is going to focus on COVID safe working. As the country gradually reopens for business, quite literally, the practicalities of what constitutes a safe workplace, with the government guidelines posing so many questions for everybody, me included. So our aim today is to provide more clarity on any subjects that are coming along this line. I'd firstly like to introduce our exciting panel of experts. I'm definitely not one of the experts, but our panel are. I'm joined by three highly experienced individuals in their field of HR, employment law and workspace management. Karen, would you mind by starting to give us a brief overview of your involvement in COVID safe working?
Yeah, hi, I'm Karen Morris-Lands. I have been in HR for how many years? And obviously what I'm doing now is I'm working with a number of different clients, ranging from very large corporates to small individual shops, and obviously some of BizSpace's clients as well, to manage people back into work and the safe environment. So basically, it's all questions for people at all different levels on how we can get people back into work and how we can do that safely.
Fabulous, thanks Karen. And Peter?
Yes, hi everybody. Thanks very much, Emma. Yes, Peter Bell from Expedite Group. We are a turnkey commercial property business. At the front end, we look like CBRE, and the back end, we look like Pickfords. And in the middle, we do all kinds of stuff for tenant occupiers, including things like fire risk assessments and all kinds of sort of health and safety goodies for working in offices, particularly. We've been working with our clients and advising landlords as well on how to get back to work, essentially how to make the workplace safe, all the sort of ideas and outcomes of the COVID-19 risk assessments, which are interesting in terms of most people trying to get people back to work. So I can answer questions today on the practicalities of what to do, some interpretation of the guidelines, which are a little bit loose, but we'll navigate through that, and hopefully give some insights on how to get back to work.
Great, thanks Peter. You went off slightly there, but hopefully it came back at the end, so hopefully your volume and your sound will be great for all these questions. And definitely last but not least, Michelle, if you could give us a bit of a summary.
Sure. Hi everyone. My name's Michelle Chance. I'm an employment partner at City Law Firm Rosenblatt Limited. We're quite an unusual law firm. We're very entrepreneurial and dynamic. So we're part of a group of businesses that also own a corporate finance boutique and also a litigation funding practice. I can talk firsthand about the experience of joining a new law firm in lockdown, because that's exactly what I've done. So I actually resigned from my previous firm towards the end of February, obviously not knowing what was about to happen. And I've joined the firm remotely, working from home at the beginning of May. So I head up a team who I actually have never met in person, but we're working, amazingly together, very collaboratively. Hopefully clients would never know that we've not physically, met each other in person, because we're in constant contact all day long on Teams and email, and I feel like I know them really well. So in terms of the sorts of advice that I'm giving as an employment partner at the moment, unfortunately, obviously, as you would expect, lots of collective redundancies advice. With the coronavirus job retention scheme starting to wind down, employers are unfortunately, looking at having to make collective redundancies. They're going to have to start contributing to the cost of that from August, and obviously it's going to wind down and come to an end in October. And then we've obviously been dealing with lots and lots of furloughing queries, especially with flexible furloughing coming in July. So from an employment law perspective, I can answer your questions about the legal implications of that.
Great, thanks Michelle. I'm sure we'll get an awful lot of those coming through. Okay, thanks everybody. Today's session will kick off with a summary of the landscape in relation to COVID safe working, and then we'll follow on with an open question and answer with anyone that's joined the webinar. Please do feel free to post your questions on the question and A function at any point during the webinar, and we'll do our utmost to try and get through as many as possible. We have had a lot through already, so please make sure that you get your questions in quick. Okay, so we'll start with question 1. Peter, would you mind starting things off? Maybe
Sure.
giving us a brief overview of the current landscape in terms of the most recent guidelines and obligations for business owners and employees?
Yep. Well, we're looking back to 11th of May when the guidelines were first issued. I mentioned they're a little bit loose. Essentially what the guidelines are, there are obligations on employers to extend effectively the health and safety, statutory health and safety mandate for looking after everybody at work, but extending it into COVID-19 as a live issue. So for instance, if you have a fire risk assessment, this protects you against an event that is unlikely to happen, you don't want to happen. But the extension of the COVID on your HSE is about an event that's actually live, it's actually happening in the workplace. So the guidelines are issued really for you to manage the risk of this current event. So if you read the guidelines, it's all about mitigation of risk, awareness of risk, and then your responsibilities to mitigate that risk. Essentially, the guidelines have been updated on the 14th of June and the 24th of June. But they bring you back basically to this document, which is something that has to be published in every workplace. And it's the 5 steps to working safer in the office. But they really are the points that employers have to take very, very seriously. Number 1 is that you must have taken a risk assessment, a COVID-19 specific risk assessment. Number 2, you must have cleaning, hand washing and hygiene procedures in line with the guidance. Number 3, you have to take all reasonable steps still to help people work from home. So even though we're all keen to get everybody back, the guidelines really and the government's directive is still to work from home if you can. Number 4 is that you've taken all reasonable steps to maintain a 2-meter distance in the workplace. Now, there's a lot of talk about this now because the government said 1 meter now. But what they've said, it said 1 meter if 2 meters is not achievable. I can talk about that a little bit later in terms of practical steps in terms of achieving this. But it's still 2 meters unless 1 meter is unattainable. And then finally, where people cannot be 2 meters apart, you've done everything practical to manage transmission risk. And that's a big ask because what does that mean? How do you interpret that? And this is why I said a little bit earlier on that the government guidelines are a little bit loose. Because they leave a lot down to the employer to interpret, because there's no specifics, obviously, that they can issue because everybody's workplace and everybody's situation is different. I don't know if that gives us a start on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just picking on before I move on to Michelle from the legal perspective, just picking up on the risk assessment on point 1, is that for every company, Peter, or is it for a certain size of company?
If you have less than 5 employees, you don't have to undertake the risk assessment. But that doesn't mean to say, of course, that you are not responsible for health and safety at work. It's just that you don't actually have to undertake a risk assessment. My advice personally is that everybody should look into what a risk assessment would mean, even if it didn't have to do one, because it will give you good guidance of good practice.
Great, thanks, Peter. So, Michelle, from a legal perspective, what are the obligations?
Sure. So I think just picking up on what Peter said, I think if you have more than 50 employees, you have to publish the risk assessment on your website. And I think if you have less than 5 employees, you don't have to do it in writing. I totally agree with you, good practice, and you should definitely do it anyway. So, you know, from an employment law point of view, the legal obligations in terms of the employer's duty. So the employer has a duty to provide a safe workplace and a safe system of work. But it's not just the employer's responsibility. So employees do have statutory duties as well that they need to comply with. And they need to take reasonable care for their own health and safety, and also that of other persons. So that would be, you know, their colleagues, other staff members. So it's really, really important that they comply with your updated health and safety policies and procedures. And I would definitely recommend that you do update your policies and procedures. And I'll come on to talk about other relevant ones, but I think definitely whistleblowing and disciplinary as well. And you need to train your staff on that if possible. In terms of the employer's duty of care, it's not just to the employees, it's obviously also a duty of care to anyone accessing or using your business space. So it's important to remember that as well. I would say that you definitely need to consult with your employees and try to get them on board about the risk assessment and what your plans for reopening the workplace are. And if you're of a particular size, then there may be employee representatives or trade union representatives that you need to consult with as well. Another important point to bear in mind is that as an employer, you are vicariously liable for the actions of your employees. So I hope that you would never employ anybody who would spit in someone's face or, you know, on purpose cough at someone. But, you know, these things do happen and you are potentially vicariously liable for that as an employer. So you really need to, you know, bring the message home to your employees that they have to comply with your health and safety policies, and failure to do so could lead to disciplinary action being taken against them. So there's 3 other rights that I want to touch on very, very briefly. The first is whistleblowing. So employees and workers have the right to whistleblow. They can make a protected disclosure if they think that an individual's health and safety is being or is likely to be endangered. And as an employer, you cannot dismiss or subject someone to detrimental treatment for having blown the whistle on these health and safety breaches. So I would definitely recommend that if you don't already have an internal whistleblowing policy, you draft one, because ideally you want health and safety concerns to be raised internally with you first, rather than the employee going straight to the health and safety executive, because, you know, there could be potential fines, criminal liability for failure to comply with health and safety legal obligations. 2 final points. So as an employer, you owe an implied duty of mutual trust and confidence to your employees. Now, these statutory health and safety obligations only apply to the workplace, but in my view, this implied duty of mutual trust and confidence would apply to people travelling into work. So, for example, if people have to travel in on public transport and are concerned about that, I would say that, you know, you need to have a discussion about that and look at altering hours that people travel in. Otherwise, you could be in breach of this implied duty of mutual trust and confidence. And if an employee has more than 2 years service, that could lead to constructive unfair dismissal claims, which ideally you would want to avoid. And then the final point, there's a very obscure piece of employment legislation that was not designed with coronavirus in mind at all. It was designed for health and safety emergencies, and it's very rarely been relied on. But it basically gives employees the statutory right not to attend the workplace or to actually leave the workplace if they have a reasonable belief that they are in serious and imminent danger. And that is subjective. So if they think the employer hasn't taken reasonable steps to protect their health and safety, they could leave the workplace or just not return. And I would say that you can't subject them to detrimental treatment or dismiss them as a result. Therefore, it may be that you have to keep them on full pay at home in those circumstances. And I do think we're going to see a lot of case law in this regard. So I think this is going to be the big area where we're going to see cases in the future. And watch this space, because I think this is going to become the sexiest piece of employment legislation this year.
I don't think I've ever heard of employment legislation being called sexy, but thanks, Michelle. Really good points. Karen, can you give us your perspective from the employer versus
follow that now, haven't I?
You have.
Well, you know, bearing in mind that obviously I've worked with a lot of BizSpace clients, and I think that's a really, really excellent summary. I'm not, you know, I think basically, just to summarize, I think a little bit about what Michelle is saying is that basically we can't sack somebody, you know, if they're arguing with us, and I think I'm starting at that point, because obviously the implications are that everybody has this right to be protected and the right to feel safe, and also they all have a duty and a responsibility to keep others safe. So that's where we're coming from when we're saying what, you know, who's got what responsibility. But we've just got to remember we're dealing with people, you know, and people are different and they're all quirky. And I love that about the job that I do, because people are very different. But people's perception of what is safe will be therefore different. So you've got, so I, you know, I might be feeling fine and I feel safe, and in the same room as somebody who doesn't feel as safe because they've got diabetes, or they're going to go home to care for a parent who they feel is vulnerable. So the best thing to do really is to talk to your people, and depending on how many people you've got, you know, Michelle uses the word consultation. Well, you know, that's probably, for a lot of us, it's just talking to people. And if you make sure you're talking to people and making notes as you go along, because obviously that will help, you know, practically, if you do get into a situation later where somebody says, well, you didn't look after me. So, well, we did talk about this on such and such a day. So always make notes of all these conversations that you're having with people. And just, you know, just remember that we've all got responsibility to keep everybody else safe. And, you know, and I know some of you possibly won't have some of these policies that Michelle is talking about. But don't overly worry about policy. Think about, you know, being practical and sensible with the numbers of people that you work with. And I'll come on to a little bit more about that later. I'm just checking my notes as well. Yeah, I think that's really what I wanted to say at that time. And just remember that we all have a different perception of what safe is, and we just need to talk about it so that people actually feel their perception of safe.
Great, thanks very much. Some really good answers there for the first question of the day. Can I just remind everyone, all the attendees, that if you want to ask a question, I won't be able to see your hands. So if you can use the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen, that would be brilliant. And then we can collect the questions as we go along. So moving on to question 2, there's clearly a lot to consider. I mean, we've just touched on the surface of it there on the last question, but what a lot of our customers in the wider business community are asking is what this actually means in practice. Peter, can we start with you first?
Yeah, I mean, what is safe? I think, Karen, you put that brilliantly well. You know, I think safe is a real perception thing. Obviously, the guidelines give us sort of direction, and the risk assessments will give us specific guidance as to what needs to happen in a workplace to make it safe against coronavirus. But I think the safety comes as much in individual personal perception as anything. So very subjective. You know, if I don't feel safe in the workplace, regardless of what my employers put in place, then my perception of it not being safe is correct. You know, your own perception is correct. What we have to do as employers is obviously work with a human-centric element of this and make sure that they feel safe. And I think the majority of that is about communication. So following the guidelines of risk assessment is one thing, but then communicating what that really means in practice and actually putting those things in place and giving guidelines to, not from the government, but from the employer, saying, look, this is what you've got to do. This is what keeps you safe. This is what keeps everybody else safe. And then making sure they fully understand those guidelines. I mean, I've got some clients that are actually getting their employees to sign these guidelines to make sure that they really understand it's important that they've read them and understand them and what they have to do to keep themselves and everybody else safe. So, you know, what is safe is, I think, number one, is a perception thing. And I think we can control and help people feel safe by communicating properly and giving them proper guidelines. And then when it comes to practical implementation of risk assessment advice, this is going to be very, very subjective to each individual office and each individual environment. A lot of it's going to be common sense. There's a lot of hygiene in the guidelines. So, you can't wash your hands and clean your hands enough. The social distancing thing is probably the hardest thing for people to work around, because some offices make it very, very difficult for you to obtain 2 meters, even 1 meter, and certainly in common areas. Very, very difficult. And so some clients are making decisions on whether or not they should go back until it's relaxed completely. Or if they can't and they really have to put people back in, then they're obviously limiting numbers. But the practical steps are going to be, putting screens up, wearing PPE, all those sort of things. And again, unfortunately, it's a horrible word, interpretation. A lot of this is about your interpretation as an employer of what you're providing that is actually complying with the guidelines and the risk assessment. All of it comes down to what's actually what happens in practice and how well your staff behave, and consider and care about them, each other. I think that's a really big point. Good community spirit here is what's needed to get these workplaces safe.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Peter. I'll just give you a brief answer from the BizSpace point of view, as our customers have been asking this question, or they were asking it at the beginning. We, as you've just said, included our staff in all of our risk assessments. So we had a general risk assessment first, that was the guidelines of the government. And then we went out to all of our teams in the business and said, looking at this, is there anything else that you would feel would make you feel safer, or would make the workplace safer for our customers to come back? And they all got involved, and we risk assessed every single one of our buildings and sites in the UK individually. They're all monitored every week. As you say, it's more about signage to make sure that people are aware that, going into a lift, 1 in, 1 out type policies, post rooms, washing hands when you come into a front door, it's that type of thing. But it's all there for them. And it's what we found is that because all of that's there and we've provided PPE for everybody, everyone now feels comfortable and safe. And that's, as you say, it's what is the perception of safe, isn't it?
Exactly that.
Yeah. Karen, if I could come on to you now about every business is completely different. Have you had any experiences of this at all with any of the businesses you've been dealing with?
Loads of businesses, from MDs saying they don't want to go back how do you do that? And some of the practical things I think I want to come on to now is watching you practically do. And sometimes in some of the businesses, they've split teams. So you've only got one member going in together and then 2 going in the next day. So you've got a rota system so that there isn't cross-infection between your teams if there's a situation, and that's quite practical. So then that sort of makes people safe, because they're working with the same person all the time, and they're making their own little bubbles, if you like, together. And that seems to be quite a good way forward. I think what you said, Emma, about actually doing risk assessments with people, I think that's really, really valuable. And I think and really, again, it's about talking to people. I mean, the Harvard Business School, I've always said that where people want to hear communication from is from their line managers. So whatever size of your organization, although we're writing things down, you can have conversations with people. And don't forget, you can do quirky things to make it fun, to remind people. I mean, that's a BizSpace value there, you can have a buzzword instead of, COVID-19, you could have a buzzword in the office. If somebody doesn't feel safe, you could say, well, actually, don't come, rather than saying don't come too close to me, you can say bananas, because you could use something like that will make people go, oh yeah, okay, sorry. Because, and then people would be more comfortable to use a buzzword rather than saying, actually, you're too close, because it's trying to make people realize what everybody else's space is anyway within a small environment. So there's some practical things that you can do to lift the mood, I think, even though but at the same time reminding people constantly that we're in this situation. I mean, none of us have ever done this before. So we're all, I think somebody said earlier, we're all human beings. And as human beings, we're just reacting with the way that we think that we are reacting. And I just say the other day as well to somebody that it's how your brain is working at the moment. We're all hardwired into, this stress mode. And so actually our perceptions today may be different tomorrow. And so maybe baby steps in bringing people back into the office, maybe, one or two two at a time, and maybe 1 day a week and then 2 days a week. Like very much you might bring somebody back from long-term sick, I suppose, because we're used to this. We've been doing it for so long now. I think it takes 30 days to change a habit. Well, we've all got this habit of being at home now. It's 90 days. So, and I think it is important that we get people back into the workplace so we can motivate them, and people we're social animals. We need to be in the office.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm desperate to get back, I must admit. A lot of this is still down to individual choice though, isn't it? And everyone is very different. So what if employees don't want to return to the workplace? I know you just touched a little bit on that, Karen. Michelle, perhaps you could give us a summary from the legal perspective?
Sure. So, I mean, I absolutely agree with what Karen said. It's essential that you talk to your employees and you try and understand the particular reasons why they don't want to return. So, don't make blanket assumptions about people based on protected characteristics. So, don't just assume that because someone may be from the BAME community or of a certain age, that you deem them to be high risk, therefore they definitely won't want to come back and we'll leave them to come back last. That would be a big mistake. So I think, there are certain categories of people that you need to be aware of. So, for example, people with mental health issues, anxiety, may be particularly nervous and anxious about coming back. So it's really important to understand their concerns if they have them, and take steps to, signpost them to wellbeing resources, things like that. Pregnant employees are a special category of employee, and they you can treat them differently. So, for example, as a very last resort, if it's not safe for them to return, and you'd need to do a different risk assessment for them because they're pregnant. So that's on top of the the usual risk assessment you would do. But if it's not safe for them to return and there's no suitable alternative role that they could safely return to, then you may actually need to suspend them on full pay. But you wouldn't need to do that with anyone else. They are a separate category. You need to think carefully about your employees who may be disabled. And when I say disabled, I mean have a disability in legal terms. So you would need to make reasonable adjustments for them, and you should speak to them about what those reasonable adjustments to accommodate their disability would be. So I just think in terms of your return to work plans, you need to make sure that you're not indirectly discriminating against anyone as well. So, if someone is physically disabled and there's social distancing measures and, you can't use the lifts, for example, or whatever it might be, you need to make sure that that's not indirectly discriminating against them. Also, in terms of changing hours, that might indirectly discriminate against women who may have, more childcare responsibilities. I'm mindful of, not saying that because, dads are equally hands-on and should totally encourage them to have equal childcare responsibilities as women. So I think those are important things to bear in mind, but also that what I said was the sexy part of employment legislation. But if someone subjectively does have this genuinely held reasonable belief that they are in serious and imminent danger if they return to work, then they could potentially stay home on full pay. So you do need to think about that. I mean, I agree with what Karen said. The tribunals haven't dealt with this before either. It's completely unprecedented circumstances for them. And we really don't know, how an employment tribunal would determine these sort of cases. But I would just say to employers, if you've done everything that you can to take on board their health and safety concerns and risks, and you've tried to address them, then hopefully, the likelihood of successful claims being brought against you would be minimised in those circumstances. And again, if employees are particularly clinically vulnerable, in those very high risk categories, then look at keeping them on furlough if they're already on furlough, potentially agreeing to them being on unpaid leave, but they would need to consent to that. So I think we're going to be fine whilst the furlough scheme is in place, but if there is a second peak or a second wave in October, and that's when the furlough system comes to an end, the coronavirus job retention scheme, then I think that's when employers are going to have to say, look, was it a reasonable management instruction for me to say to you, you do need to return to the workplace? And if you're refusing, is that a fair ground for dismissal? So we're just going to have to judge it on the individual circumstances at the relevant time. But I would say, if anyone who doesn't want to come back to work does have a protected characteristic or falls into any of these categories. It isn't a plug for my services, but yeah, please do come and take legal advice, because, you know, the consequences could be potentially quite severe if you get it wrong.
Thanks, Michelle. Karen, do you want to add anything else from a HR perspective on Michelle's points?
Well, yeah, overall, what kind of employer do you want to be? You know, this is a national crisis, or a global crisis, you know. So I would ask myself that question when, you know, if somebody's resisting coming back to work. We're all working in very small communities, and the great thing about this, if there's anything great coming out of COVID-19, is one, our adoption of technology, and two, the fact that we are more community orientated than we've ever been. And, you know, the repercussions of how you're dealing with somebody, they'll last forever, you know. And I know a lot of you are working in very small groups of people, and they're people that you're going to be working with maybe for 10, 15 years. So, you know, if there's a slight blip now, well, does that really matter? I always, you know, no disrespect to Michelle, but I always think that when you start to deal with the legislation bit, you're dealing with the mud. You know, if I'm a gardener, and that's the level of, I have to, as an HR person, I have to put some topsoil in on top of the mud so that we're working above that, because there is the legislation, but we want as human beings to be better than that, you know. And I think Michelle made some very valuable points, and there's so much to think about. But actually, what kind of employer do you want to be? How do you want that person to think and feel and talk about your business? Because that's your employer brand, that people will remember the employers that treated them well and come now. And those people that don't treat people well, they won't be in business. I can guarantee that from my experience. And that's really all I wanted to add.
Thank you. No, very, very valuable. So moving on slightly and going back to sort of the safety and COVID after, you know, coming back from COVID, there's clearly so much to consider on implementation. Peter, what advice would you give people to where to start?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to do is to get things organised, you know, well in advance, even before one individual goes into the workplace, essentially, because you've got to make sure that workplace is properly cleaned and is safe for even particularly for a lone worker. But as you come back into the office in your dribs and drabs, which is what most people seem to be doing. You know, just make sure that you've got all of the equipment that's been recommended in the risk assessment, you know, placed in the right places. All of the signage that we've heard earlier on in terms of giving people direction on travel, on distancing, and guidelines. I mean, the guidelines for me, I keep going on about this, and I think there's a theme throughout, you know, all three of us, that communication is the key. So, you know, you've got to get things in place, but you've got to explain what is in place and how to use it and how to operate and how to behave in that workplace. So that's all about communication. And I'm really picking up on Karen's point there about the sort of, you know, what kind of an employer do you want to be? And then picking up Michelle's point about, you know, you don't want to end up in court. You know, communication is the key to most of this. You know, you're showing that you care and that you're involved and you're engaged with your employees, and you're demonstrating, you know, your duty of care, but also that you do genuinely care. It's not just a job, you know, or an obligation or a set of guidelines that making you care. But equally, if you do get into any tricky situations, having a good audit trail of how you've communicated what to do, how to do it. I've done my risk assessment, I've communicated it, I've put it in place, I've given guidelines. So, you know, it really is then a shared responsibility for safety rather than just the employer. Mm-hmm. And I do think I want to pick up on the point that was made earlier on by Michelle, which is, you know, it's not just about employers putting these things in place to make everybody safe, because the guidelines put all of the onus on the employer. And there's not much in there about what the employee's responsibility is. But there's lots of things that employees can engage with. And I'm sure they care about each other, their co-workers, to make sure that they are healthy when they turn up in the workplace. You know, why wait to go to work to have your temperature taken? You should be taking your temperature before you leave the house. You know, so am I well? Am I feeling right? Is my journey safe, etc., etc. So putting that type of thing into your guidelines for your employees, so they get the feeling that they are sharing this responsibility, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen, from touching on the communication side of it, from the internal communications, do you have any views on how you should be communicating to employees?
Well, obviously as openly as you can, and you can say, you know, you can be very practical and say, look, never done this before, so any of your input is really important, because we want to get this right. It's getting it right for everybody. So it's making it, it isn't, the onus is on the employer, but it's making it a shared responsibility, because that's what will make people feel safe. And so conversations, you know, having those conversations with individuals is the most important thing. And I completely agree with Peter on that. I think it is about talking things through and making sure that, you know, that people feel involved, because if you involve people, they take that responsibility and that sense of ownership. And, you know, get people to flag things when they think that it's not right, you know. You know, say, so if you create that kind of environment, they will, and they'll help you. And that's, you know, they're an asset to keeping that place safe for you. So think of it like that, really. It's keeping them safe and their friends and families and everybody else in these roads.
Absolutely. And yeah, talking about communities that Peter touched on before, that's, you know, that's how most buildings are operating as a community. So they do all and should all look out for each other throughout this process, I think. But yeah, okay, thanks very much for all of those insights. Really, really useful. We're having lots of questions submitted from the audience, so I'm going to just touch on a few of these now. So we've had one here that says, listening to your clients, what is their biggest concern about fully returning back to the office environment? I might just answer this one first from our perspective, because we have had, obviously we've got clients throughout the UK, and what we're hearing from our clients is that they're unsure when to bring all their staff back. We've touched on this before. The staff are used to working from home, so they're a little bit worried about staff morale if this, you know, if they all of a sudden pull them out of their home life and they start having to commute again. They are still a little bit worried. Is it safe to return? You know, am I okay to come back? Am I all of a sudden going to catch it? Will there be another spike? So it's all of these things that we're hearing, really, and that's where we're trying to listen and make sure that we show all of our customers that, you know, yes, bring them back when it's right for you, but you can come in and you can see that we have got a safe environment. This is like coming into your new home. You know, do take it gradually, but it's all here for you when you're ready for it. Karen, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think you're right to identify people are nervous. I mean, we've got local lockdowns like, you know, what's happening in Leicester, and that is making people nervous. So I think from that point of view, I think it is, like I was saying, you know, do the baby steps, have the conversations, just be aware of it, you know, and that's really, I think, what we've said before.
Absolutely. Peter, one of the questions here that's just come through is, who's responsible for making the structure of buildings compliant, where they're not owned by the business inside? So, you know, I suppose they're touching on here if it's a multi-business or if it's somebody sharing a floor in a building. And a good example, I suppose, is a dance studio. If they require ventilation in the form of opening windows, what if the current space doesn't, you know, facilitate what they think they require under the government guidelines?
My goodness, there's a lot to cover there. I mean,
there
ultimately,
is.
Yeah, the responsibility for the building is the landlord's responsibility. So the common areas, you know, entrances, stairwells, corridors, shared facilities, toilets, lifts, etc., etc. The health and safety in those areas is a responsibility of the landlord. But of course, you as an employer, if you are a tenant in a multi-tenanted building, you still have a responsibility for the health and safety of your employee. Absolutely in your own workspace, but equally to some degree, and I'll let Michelle explain exactly where that stops and starts, but you know, their journey to work now, I believe, this is where we don't have any case law, but you know, if you're not advising and assisting and guiding your staff on their journey to work, which then includes, you know, the minute they walk into the building that you might not own, etc., etc., you've got to share the information that the landlord gives you on how to operate in his or her areas. So that's got to be part of your guidelines. You know, it can't be, well, once they're my responsibility once they turn up through my door. You know, legally, we don't know, but highly likely that if you've got information about the safety of the building that you're operating in, you know, across the board, then you've got to share that with your employees. So, you know, it's not just looking after your own space. The dance studio with the ventilation, that's a good one. you know, if it really does depend on what, most dance floors are probably on ground floors. That's maybe a bit of a generalization. But if the windows in a building are sealed for health and safety purposes, and that could be to meet a fire risk assessment, part of the fire strategy, for instance, smoke, you'd think opening windows helps smoke, but actually it actually generates bigger problems sometimes. If you compromise the building's fire evacuation or fire regulations or fire assessment, you won't be able to open the windows. So even if the COVID-19 sort of advice is ventilate, which it does, it ventilates as much as you can, but the risk assessment for COVID-19 risk assessment will not override a fire risk assessment. So we get asked these questions a lot. Can we open all the doors? Can we open all the fire doors? What can we do? If it compromises the fire strategy for the building, you will not be able to ventilate it that way. You can do that in a controlled manner, but you won't be able to leave a fire door open, for instance, that's protecting a lift lobby or a stairwell to ventilate, because you will be compromising the building's fire strategy. And if the building's not safe from a fire perspective, forget COVID-19 coming back to work, you wouldn't be able to occupy the building anyway. So that might answer a couple of other questions that we generally get asked on this. Can we prop a fire door open so we can get some fresh air? The answer is no.
Yeah, no, thanks, Peter. And we have actually had that question. They've actually phrased it in to avoid touching doors. Are building fire doors allowed to remain open? But you've answered that, so that's great. We've also had another one that's just come through that's saying, if there is someone in a shared building with COVID-19, are they obliged to inform the building manager, and will the building manager then inform the other customers or tenants on site? I'll answer this first, and then I'd like to open it up really to everyone else on the panel, if that's okay. We have had this happen within our buildings, and absolutely we would then let the other customers on site know, but we would let them know via an email. We wouldn't disclose who the customer was, and we absolutely wouldn't disclose who the person was, but we would let them know that we have someone who we think may have COVID, they've gone home, they're being tested, you know. We then contact the government advice line, and we've had different advice from in different buildings where we've had this happen, going back to March, where on one case we were told it's fine, the person hasn't been in your building for 7 days, you don't need to do anything else, just please now keep an eye out for anyone with any other, you know, symptoms coming through. We had another one that said, that's fine, you just need to re-clean the area that they've been in. So we always follow the government advice line, ring them and then follow the instructions from there. But going back to the question, yeah, absolutely, we would tell the people within the buildings, but without disclosing any sort of personal data of the person involved. I'll throw it open to the rest of the panel really for any other thoughts.
Most people will know anyway.
Yeah, very true.
I mean, you know, you're working in a community. People do know each other, you know, when you've worked in a building. I mean, so I guess there's that rumour and fact thing. If people are hearing rumours, let's check. I would suggest that they checked with the BizSpace local manager to see what's fact and what's fiction, because that'll happen. People talk, you know. So, you know, that's why I think that most people probably get to know these things anyway. And obviously we're all heightened to it as well, you know, but yeah, we'll probably get to know anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just coming on with the questions are coming through thick and fast, so I'm going to go straight on to some more that are coming through live. Cleaning and hygiene must be a key concern. What are the panel's thoughts on how to ramp up cleaning regimes without costs getting out of control, or when it's hard to recruit more cleaning staff? Any thoughts?
Okay, I suppose I better answer that. Cleaning doors, windows, seems to be my bag. It is difficult, and I find the additional cost associated to changing their cleaning regime really is quite exorbitant. You know, going back to the risk assessment, what will that say to you? It's not going to give you, well, you need to clean this every 5 minutes or every hour, or you have to close this particular breakout area because you can't maintain social distancing, etc., etc., etc. It's all going to be back down to your own interpretation of what hygiene is and where your risks are. So where all the touch points are, you know, I don't want to touch that door, etc., etc. If you can't touch doors, you're going to have to keep cleaning your hands. So the regime of actually getting cleaners in, you know, maybe every day or maybe twice a day is quite prohibitive for a lot of clients. So that's actually stopping them coming back to work. It's cost of actually implementing some of these measures. But most clients are quite happy to invest in a lot of hand sanitizer and automatic hand sanitizers. on the basis that, it might be that there is a second wave, and it might be that this coronavirus and these type of viruses are around for a long time. I mean, perish the thought. But if we're investing in, a few bits and bobs that we can always use, it's not such a hit financially. And it's an absolute essential, I have to say, over and above everything else. We've had this from the beginning in terms of advice is, cleanliness and hygiene is the number one thing to combat this particular virus. Yeah. So the answer really is, I think you're going to have to stick your hand in your pocket to do the essentials. But if it's going to start getting out of control cost-wise with new cleaning regimes, then you might consider, when you actually come back to work.
Karen, you had a thought on that as well. Thanks, Peter.
Some of my clients, what they've done is that they've and you know how you get in McDonald's the sort of the cleaning checklist and the times that they've done it. They've sort of put that more prominent in their offices, and then at a certain time, people go, oh, actually, everybody clean your desk now, or So again, it becomes it's not just a cleaner's responsibility to be cleaning. So that might save a little bit of money. You can do it in a practical way. Say, actually, we haven't done any cleaning since 12:15. Let's say we would just take a moment. It's now 3 o'clock. Just a moment, just wipe out down things, and then everybody feeling that cleaning was. Think about how people would behave in a hospital environment. That's the kind of thing that they might do, and we're trying to create that kind of cleanliness in an office environment. So actually, then just having that schedule will remind everybody, and then people then focus on it. So just by putting something like that on the wall, there's different ways of approaching, keeping that in the forefront of people's minds, but literally a checklist with times on it. And if people took it in turns just to be responsible for reminding people, have you washed, have we all washed our hands in the last 2 or 3 hours? What is it that we could do? So those kind of things. And again, you're involving people.
No, that's a good idea, really good idea. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on quite swiftly because we are getting lots of questions coming through, which is fabulous, and thanks very much for all participating in it. The mitigation of risk documents which needs to be displayed, where can they download this, Peter? I think this is maybe one for you.
The mitigation of risk document. There is really the document that you need to download, which is on the government's guidelines, return to work guidelines under offices, or in actual fact, you can scroll down, you'll find this for almost any workplace. There is a poster that you need to display, that you need to sign. So those 5 points I made in the very beginning of this webinar, in terms of the responsibilities, you have to sign that document and display it. Where to display it? Well, if you're a big office, you probably need to display it in as many places as you can, but certainly on the main entrance. And as I say earlier on about risk mitigation, you are signing not quite your life away, but you are signing that you have undertaken this, these measures, including the risk assessment, taking all reasonable measures for social distancing and transmission of the virus. So it's not to be, not to be taken lightly. Michelle mentioned earlier on that, you do need to publish on your website if you have more than 50 employees. Again, it's a best practice thing. If you're able to communicate it in as many ways as you can, what to do, what not to do. I just want to pick up very quickly on Karen's point there. I think that community spirit thing, let's all muck in together, let's all keep this clean, is an absolute imperative, I think, for our own social responsibility here. But whatever you do, don't make sure that you're not effectively passing down the responsibility for cleaning in the workplace to employees, because it only takes one of them to say, well, you didn't keep the place clean, you expected us to do so, and then they're all back in Michelle's court.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. And just to add another point on that, they're all on our website as well. So if anyone wants to go onto our website, they can download the forms from the BizSpace website as well. We've got a complete section just on COVID with all of the information from the government guidelines right the way through to try and help anybody. So, okay, moving on. We've had a question saying, I've received a number of questions from the clients regarding air conditioning and shared circulated air. Should we advise not to use the aircon? I'm pressing that to Peter again now, I'm afraid.
Aircon, doors, we're going to be on toilets soon, I know we are. It's only a matter of time. Yeah, air conditioning is not going to make a blind bit of difference, essentially. It is going to recirculate the air, but just being in the air, it recirculates just by movement. So, there's a lot of talk about this. Air conditioning systems do not filter out coronavirus, so they're not any kind of protection. but equally they're not actually any kind of generative. The air, if it's in the air, it's in the air. Okay, and if there is circulation of air and there's no ventilation, then you have a risk, obviously, if COVID is present in the workplace. So the bottom line is, it's not going to make a lot of difference. So you don't switch it off, because it's not going to make any difference. You might get a completely different view from a mechanical and electrical consultant. Remember, I'm an expert at something. I can't remember what it was, Emma. But it's not actually air conditioning systems. But I know enough about this to say that it neither helps nor hinders.
Great, thanks, Peter. Okay, we're coming down to the last sort of couple of questions now. So I think this one's for Karen and Michelle, actually, but we're hearing a lot of businesses returning to offices, even if their employees can work from home and the government guidelines remain the same. Are you hearing that?
So, I mean, I'm hearing more hospitality sector clients where obviously, restaurants, private members clubs, a lot of their functions, they can't work from home. Mm-hmm. So we're advising in that area, but certainly professional services firms are still predominantly having their employees work from home. I think, certain key workers who are going in to do printing, check the post, that kind of thing, a couple of days a week. But that's what we're hearing. Something that I wanted to add actually to something Karen said earlier, which I totally agree with in terms of communicating with employees about returning to work. But if some people are perhaps not that comfortable speaking up about any concerns they may have, one way of canvassing their views is doing an anonymous survey, and people might be more open about their actions.
Michelle, you've just gone off sound-wise. You've just frozen on the last point there, but I got to the bit where you said anonymous survey, and totally agree. I think that's a great way of getting feedback without anyone feeling pressurized into it. Hopefully we'll get Michelle back shortly, but I'll move on to one of the last questions. So what is the guidelines where the corridors do not allow for 2 meter distancing? Is it safe to allow staff to return? Peter, this is most likely one for you, I think.
Yeah, so we're back to this 2 meter versus 1 meter issue. I mean, a risk assessment will tell you that you need to put one-way systems in and potentially, avoid 2 people being in a corridor or on a stairwell. Excuse me. It's very impractical in most cases to be able to implement this. So, we do have clients who say, well, if we can't maintain the 2 meter distance, then we're not opening the office. But there are measures you can take to mitigate this. You can actually insist that people wear PPE in these areas, so they've got to wear a mask. You can restrict the flow by saying only one person in the corridor at a time, etc., etc. It goes back to that lovely word interpretation. What is your interpretation? A risk assessor will give advice, and the risk assessor will probably say, well, you are not able to maintain 2 meter distance here. So you will have to either make that a one-way system, or you're going to have to take protective measures for if anybody's passing each other and they're less than 2 meters. So it's a tricky one, but if your risk assessor will give you advice on that, and there will be ways around it. It'll probably be around wearing PPE.
Great, thanks, Peter. Okay, we're coming to the end of our hour, so I've just got one final question that's come through. What happens if I share the building with other businesses that may have different procedures and not follow the guidelines? I will touch on this one because this is very close to our heart, really, and we've communicated with all of our customers and all of our staff because we feel very firmly, I suppose, I don't know if that's the right word I want to say, but we feel very strongly about protecting our staff in particular and a duty of care to the customers that are on our sites. So we've advised everybody that if we find that any of our licensees aren't adhering to the guidelines, we will in the first instance absolutely go and talk to them, because they may not realise, it's very easy sometimes to go close to somebody without realising that you are, because we are all human and it's human interaction. But if we find that they are doing it again and they're deliberately doing it, then we will have no qualms with actually asking that customer to leave our building. We will make sure that the safety of all of our staff and customers is very well protected. Peter, do you want to finish with anything on that? And Karen, maybe yourself afterwards?
No, it's a really good question. We get asked that, what about, same question really about, what about somebody in my own company that's not adhering to it?
Mm-hmm.
We've heard from Michelle about whistleblowing. But I think it all goes back to the points that Karen was making earlier on. This is a societal issue, and it's a community issue. we've got to be talking to each other, and we should be opening up. And I've personally found that the coronavirus has opened up all kinds of conversations that I wouldn't otherwise be able to have with people. You know, there's much more openness. So, you know, would you go and speak to somebody, you know, in a multi-tenanted building normally about anything? You know, well, now you have a reason to, and I think you ought to. I think you should be speaking to each other, and it not just be down to you, Emma, in your organisation to have to speak to somebody else. All of your customers should be talking to each other and building that lovely community, and helping each other and demonstrating that you know that you care. And I think if you do have to, it'd be very disappointed. I hope you don't. If you do have to get to a point where you really are, you know, having to, you know, make your point with somebody, then, you know, you possibly don't want them in the building anyway. You know, this is not the time for people to be operating that way, behaving that way. And this is the
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure we won't, because we've got amazing customers, but yeah, absolutely. I just want people to know that it is a very strong subject. Karen, do you want to have the final word?
The only thing that I remember about these last few months, and the thing that really made me really happy, was the clapping for the NHS. That was all about community, and that's exactly what, you know, I'm just picking up on that point. It is about the community, the people that we're working with, the people, and I don't want to lose that. I mean, BizSpace has always had this really great community spirit, and it's really great, and it's great. But now let's all hold on to that, and that would be the only thing that I really wanted to add to that. You know, we can choose how we want to be in this new future, and being part of a community and talking, as Peter says, that's what we want for the future. We don't know where it's going, but we do know that people are the most valuable thing that we have.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've had a brilliant hour. Thank you ever so much. We've had some great questions coming through and some very brilliant answers from our experts. I'd like to thank the audience as well for joining, and the panelists for their time and their insights. I would like to remind everybody that the recording of this session will be available on the BizSpace website if you want to rerun it, or if you've not, you know, if you want to tell friends to have a listen to anything in particular that you think might be relevant. And today is the first of a series of sessions exploring the future of business that will hopefully answer these questions and others that you may have coming to light in the next couple of months. So we will announce the next session very soon. So thanks again. And from BizSpace and everybody else here, thanks very much, and bye, and enjoy your afternoon.